Hi, my name's Phil and I like talking about politics. And with 3 weeks still to go before Parliament just reconvenes for its autumn showdown with Boris Johnson over Brexit, the former Chancellor Philip Hammond has been the latest Conservative MP to issue a public warning to the Prime Minister. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So let's take a look at what Philip Hammond has been saying first of all, and then consider the implications. For a start, when a Conservative MP issues a public warning to a member of their Conservative government, it is intended for public consumption in some way. After all, he could easily speak with Johnson in a more private setting if he so wished. So the message is more for the public, or at least the wider Conservative Party, and less for the Prime Minister. So the letter from Hammond to Johnson was also signed by 4 other former ministers, including Rory Stewart, who was the leadership candidate who ruled out a no-deal Brexit. In it, Hammond has pointed out that Boris Johnson has no intention of negotiating a deal with the EU. Again, a fairly odd thing to say to Johnson himself, so again, public consumption. Now, this has been fairly clear, of course, from Johnson's refusal to meet with any EU leaders, even though he's been invited to do so. He chose instead to turn down these invitations and then get Michael Gove to say that it's the EU who are refusing to talk. But Leave supporters are saying that Johnson wants a deal, but that he can only get it once we leave to show them how serious we are. And this is the fear amongst those who oppose no deal, both Remainers and Leavers. We all know that the EU are not going to cave. We also know that what Johnson says he is demanding is legally and politically impossible. The aim of the arch-Brexiteers is no deal at all, and it always has been. Hammond also noted that trying to get rid of the backstop was a wrecking tactic, something to ensure that no deal were possible. I've said as much myself. The only reason Brexiteers pick on the backstop, which has no effect on anything in Great Britain, is because they know it prevents any deal being made. They don't want a deal. They just don't want to admit that, because if they get their way, they want to escape the blame for the consequences. Hammond also said that to bypass Parliament in any way would create a constitutional crisis. Now, I have to say on that point, I don't agree. A constitutional crisis suggests a situation that our constitution cannot deal with, but it can. There's an overwhelming majority of the House of Commons opposed to a no-deal Brexit. They have more than enough numbers to stop Johnson, and they have the power and time to do it as well. If Boris Johnson manages to take us out of the EU without a deal, whether by naming the general election to be after the deadline or by proroguing Parliament, then it will have been Parliament that allowed him to do so. The only thing casting any doubt on whether MPs will stop this no-deal Brexit is party politics. So if Hammond wants to talk about a constitutional crisis, he should be blaming party politics for it, not a Prime Minister who hasn't the executive authority to challenge Parliament. After all, it's Parliament who decides who the Prime Minister is. If they choose not to replace him with someone else, then the consequence is as much their fault as his. One rather more worrying aspect of what Hammond said, and I accept this is one person's word that I'm not always inclined to trust, is that Johnson privately told Hammond that he wanted a deal, but that, and I quote, there were people pulling the strings in Downing Street whose agenda is different. Now, if true, and as I say, it may not be, that would be to suggest that Boris Johnson is not actually in charge of the government. It would be to strongly suggest that he's just a puppet for outside influences. And we all know who the puppet master of Downing Street is likely to be in this scenario: Dominic Cummings, the alleged prime ministerial advisor who makes public statements on government policy. But I'm going to be covering his role at the weekend. But the rest of the letter seemed a little toothless. Hammond said that he did not wish to see Boris Johnson defeated in a confidence vote, and unlike before summer, there wasn't even a hint that he might reluctantly do so to stop no deal. That doesn't mean he wouldn't, but the threat was not in the letter. That removed the teeth from this warning altogether. After all, deposing Johnson as Prime Minister is the only thing that the Tory rebels have over him. Hammond said that there were legislative ways to stop no deal. I don't see it. And if there were, how come nobody is able to speculate on what they may be? The bottom line is that we need an extension, no matter what Brexit path we take, if we are to avoid crashing out without a deal. Legislation may be able to compel Johnson to pretend to seek an extension, but the UK Parliament cannot compel other EU governments to comply, you know, them being sovereign and all. So if Johnson deliberately makes a bad job of seeking the extension by, for example, personally insulting the French and any other nation that is wavering, then we can still end up out on our arse. We cannot legislate to stop no deal. We can only replace the Prime Minister. And if Hammond isn't supporting that course of action, then he's not really opposing a no-deal Brexit at all. But then I came back to the reason for this letter. Why write it? Why did those other former ministers sign it? It contains no threat to Johnson, just an appeal. And they did it in a public way. Perhaps Rory Stewart is the clue. I felt about his leadership challenge that there was no chance of him winning the contest and that his pitch was to prepare for future leadership. If Boris Johnson actually turns out to be a mad dog, and he is giving the very good impression of it, then he will deliver a no-deal Brexit. It will be an unmitigated disaster because anyone with any brains can see that a UK cut off from the world will be weak. I felt Rory Stewart was positioning himself as the I told you so candidate for the rebuilding of the Conservatives once the swivel-eyed loons have been exposed and excommunicated. Perhaps the same motivation explains this interjection from Hammond and the others. I felt that Hammond and Liddington in particular would be seeing their parliamentary career ending. They're about that age and wouldn't, just act to stop no deal free from concerns of their political futures. But perhaps not. Perhaps they see this new far-right leaning Conservative Party as a flash in the pan and that they can come back to power very soon next year. Maybe they're all angling as the I told you so group once the no-deal Brexit is exposed for the disaster that it would be. And if you want to lead the party again in the future, the unwritten rule is that you don't undermine the current leadership. So Hammond shifting his pre-summer position of being willing to vote against a Conservative government to stop a no-deal to now saying that he would not do this does indicate to me a shift in political aims on his part. And for the sake of party politics, perhaps we have another few MPs who are willing to stand by and allow no deal to happen in order to play that political game. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.